But kicking us off, Rory, we start with the theory to practice of Maslow's hierarchy of needs.
Indeed, Ken. And I think this is a wonderful piece of theory. I don't think there's anybody who's ever studied counselling or psychology who's never come across the work of Abraham Maslow. But I think, sadly, he's sometimes a little misunderstood and sometimes a little dismissed. Abraham Maslow was an American psychologist who in the 1940s developed and, in fact, was the cornerstone of humanistic psychology. He worked alongside Carl Rogers at a distance. They were never colleagues, but they thought the same. And one of the key aspects of Maslow's hierarchy of needs is that humans had free will. This was quite a departure from, the psychoanalytical school of therapy, where people were thought to be governed by their subconscious processes and driven by the subconscious, and a massive depart from the behaviorist school of psychology and therapy, if you like, where people were conditioned to think in a way. This was that humans had free will, and it did actually form part of something called the human potential movement in the 60s, about how much potential a human being has. And to illustrate that human potential, Maslow developed what was called his hierarchy of needs. It's an equilateral triangle, a triangle with equal sides. And within that sides, there is like an elevator of different needs. So right at the base of the pyramid, at the thick end, he talks about survival needs, the physiological needs, the ability to be able to breathe and to drink and to eat and to use the bathroom. And then he moved up to the next level, which was safety needs, ability to be safe, have housing and feel secure in the world. And then he moved up to love and belonging, having friends, feeling that you're connected to something, being known in the world. And then that led to esteem, feeling that you're, a person in the world, you're an okay person, you're connected to the world. And then finally, self-actualization, where you could be literally anything you wanted to do. And one of the interesting things about Maslow's hierarchy of needs is that he studied very highly motivated people. He studied Einstein, for instance, and he noticed that those people who were really successful and were really motivated to make changes in their lives and indeed in others, were self-actualized. That's the basis of the theory, and a lot of people think it stops there. But actually, Maslow went on to have a bigger career in management, in managing people and the development of how you manage people, HR in other words. He took that theory into HR, and he had a bigger career in human resources than he did in psychology. But it still remains a key base of theory that is taught, throughout psychology and counselling.
It is indeed. And I know on our YouTube channel, it's one of the most searched for terms is Maslow's hierarchy of needs. And I think that is because, as you've quite rightly said, Rory, it spills out of counseling, out of psychotherapy, even outside of psychology into business, where business HR managers would look at hierarchy of needs. And it's worth getting a grip of the theory. But of course, this is about theory and practice and how we see a theory that we might learn from a textbook, or as Rory has beautifully explained there, the theory of Maslow's hierarchy of needs. How do we see that presented within our therapy room? What might we see in a client, or what might we see in ourselves, and recognizing ourselves for our own personal development? And I want to share a story, Rory. I've had a recent trip from the UK. I went back to South Africa. I lived in South Africa for many, many years. And South Africa is a country that is I guess, quite prone to crime. So there are high walls in the area that I was staying, which is Gauteng, or was previously known as Johannesburg. High population, and all of the walls are high. all of the walls will have some form of electric fencing at the top. Most houses will have some kind of an electronic gate, so you don't have to get out of your vehicle when entering your home because of the risk of hijacking or being robbed or mugged during that process. Most of the houses have some form of an alarm that is linked to an armed response unit that will come around if a panic button is pushed, and they come with guns out, basically. And it's a different feeling to what I left in the UK, which is very calm, very tranquil. We leave our car open. We leave our home open from times. We live in North Wales. And I found myself focused on my safety and on my security when I was in South Africa. So I went right down the hierarchy of needs, down to that base, second to having my basic needs, which is food, water, being able to breathe, go to the bathroom, as you said, Rory, which is those biological needs which form the very base. But I found that I was right there in that security. I was always aware of it because I'm not used to it. I guess that's the reason for it. But it's interesting how relationships and other interests fall right down to the base of the triangle when you find yourself in that situation. I guess that's what the theory tells us, that no matter where you find yourself on that triangle, if one of the steps below you gets taken away, you fall directly below to that. And I guess a good example would be, if you wanted to test that, is hold your breath and don't breathe, and see how quickly that becomes very important to you. And you'll go right down the triangle to that very bottom of the basic needs of needing to breathe.
Absolutely, Ken. And it's a really interesting theory. I used to teach this, as we both, Ken and myself, did when we taught together. We used to say to students, what is the most important thing you need here and now? And a lot of people would say, oh, water. Water's the most important thing. And I'd say, well, you don't have to think about that, because you could live a lot longer without water than you can without air. So, breathing is the most important, then probably water. And the thing is that within this hierarchy of needs, there are things that are not swappable. You cannot swap water for air. You need air, and then you need water. And I think how we apply this, this is theory in practice. And I think how we apply it, as Ken said, if you meet someone who's really struggling, maybe paying the bills, maybe struggling to make ends meet, they're not going to be able, with few exceptions, and I think it's important to put the few exceptions in, be able to progress their lives. If you cannot eat and pay your bill and heat your home, very topical thing of our times, then how can you do anything else? How can you, develop yourself? How can you, maybe go to university or college? For our children, even school. I grew up in the 70s, and I can remember children who basically didn't eat at home, and they didn't achieve very well at school because their focus was on trying to get enough food to survive. So it still remains a very topical and very important piece of theory when we meet people, to try and understand where they are, because as therapists, we meet the client where they are, not where they hope to be or where we hope they're going to be. We meet them where they are in their circumstances. And if their circumstances are diminished, Maslow's hierarchy of needs is a very good kind of calculator, if you like, or a reference to understand where people are. It's a very, very useful piece of theory. And one of the things I'd like to say about the theory is that a lot of people think of Maslow's as a triangle where you go up literally in an elevator. You hit this level and this level and this level and this level. But actually, towards the end of his life, Maslow changed his mind, and he said that the needs that we have may be flexible at different times in our life. But it's a mightily resilient piece of theory, Ken. It seems to have stood the test of time.
Oh, definitely. And we see it playing out in our therapy rooms all the time. And this is what this section is about. What are we going to see? How do we work with that? So I'm going to put in some examples. The first example I'm going to put in is maybe somebody who has recently lost their partner. So they might present for work with around the grief and the loss or the bereavement of somebody that was very dear to them. But we would check how they are, and we would check their personal circumstances, as you've just covered, Rory. If they're unable to pay their bills, unable to put food in their cupboard, then that's going to be their primary focus before we can start working on grief, because we're going to keep getting pulled down that hierarchy of needs. That needs to be sorted before the person is able to work through their grief. They need to be able to eat, they need to be able to be heated, and to be able to live their lives, to be able to have, I guess, Rory, the luxury of grieving and of thinking about that. And that's something for us to be aware of.
Sure.
As a therapist, we might be going, no, we need to focus on the grief, but we need to, like you say, Rory, meet the client where they are. And you know, that's basic needs. It's right at the bottom of the triangle. The second one is security. And, you know, security can mean many things. I shared my trip to South Africa and what that was like. But security can also be, does the person feel safe to be able to speak to you? So your counseling room, is it set up in a way that people can't see in a window and see who's there, that maybe people can't see who might be entering therapy, can't be overheard from another room or another office? Because if the client comes in and they don't feel that they can speak freely and securely, that confidentiality may be compromised, well, that's the security. And they're unlikely to share if they feel conscious about that security. So I guess that's maybe another area, Rory, where we might see that theory really presenting itself in our practice.
Absolutely, Ken. I couldn't agree more. And I think another area that we're going to be seeing more and more is belonging and love needs.
Yeah.
We live in a very diverse society now where people identify in many different ways and look for belonging within their identification. And I think if somebody is neurodiverse or someone is from the LGBTQ plus community and they don't feel connected, or they feel there's no one like them, and this goes obviously for diverse communities in terms of race, skin color, sexuality, neurodiversity, the whole panoply of diversity, they don't feel that they are, you know, part of the society they live in, be that the school or the workplace or their hometown, then that links so strongly into belonging needs, feeling like you belong. And I think I can speak for myself, and I'm sure there'll be a lot of people listening out there who have felt that sometimes they don't really belong. They could be in a workplace, they could be in a family situation, they could even be in an education system, and they just don't feel that they belong. They're not recognized. They're not seen as who they are. And I think, in therapy, that's what we try to do. We try to see the client for who they are, their uniqueness, their, the spirit of the kind of spirit of who they are. And that links so strongly into this theory, I think, Ken.
It does, Rory. I'm seeing it there, that being recognized, having some kind of a social acceptance for who you are and your place within the world. I mean, it's right there at level number 3 in that hierarchy of needs. And a person will be pulled there when they feel that is not being met. And I think we only need to look to a recent global event, COVID. Basically isolated so many people, where all of those support systems and friends and relatives, you couldn't see them except online. And online is not in person. It is different. I mean, I guess it's nice to be able to see somebody online, but in person, there is something truly special and human to human contact about that. And we saw that became the talk. Everybody was talking about how isolated they were, how they were not able to do their usual things and mix with their usual groups. And there is a great indication, an example, as it were, of how theory relates to practice. That's hierarchy of needs, where as soon as that need is not met, it becomes what we talk about. It becomes our primary focus. I think it's an interesting bit of theory. I think it's worth looking at, revisiting if you haven't looked at it. And we've got a handout for you. It's one of Rory's super duper handouts on the hierarchy of needs. And to get that, you just go to CounsellingTutor.com. That's our website. Very top, you can click on the podcast tab, go to episode 240. That's today's episode. And right there on that page, you'll find the show notes for today's episode with links about of the topics that Rory and I speak about. But you'll also find Rory's super duper handout on the hierarchy of needs from right within that page. You can download it. It is free. Hold it in your hand, look at it, see the triangle itself. Think about yourself, think about your clients, and think about how that relates. If a client is coming in and presenting it on a certain topic again and again, is it maybe that they are at that level in the hierarchy of needs, Rory?
Absolutely can. And why don't you discuss it in your training class? I think it's an interesting topic to discuss, in your training class, or if you've got a training WhatsApp group, have a chat about it and see how that theory links, because it's also very useful for assignments. But as Ken said, it still remains a very pertinent theory to those who are studying counselling and psychotherapy.